would you please introduce yourself and also give us a brief summary about your research project? Thank you.
My name's Craig Morton. I currently work at Loughborough University in the East Midlands of the United Kingdom. I'm employed in the School of Architecture, Building and Civil Engineering, so the School of the Built Environment, as a senior lecturer. I'm part of the Transport and Urban Planning group. My research interests are primarily now in quantitative geography, so analysis of spatial data, specifically orientated around the operation of the transportation and energy systems. The Decarbonate project that I was working on was called OPTIC, which stood for Optimizing Transport Infrastructure Charge Points. It primarily focused on electric vehicle infrastructure, so charge points which are being installed in order to distribute energy from the local distribution grids into electric vehicles to allow them to move around. We managed to get access to charge event data for a network of charge points which are currently operational in Manchester, so about 100 charge points in the Greater Manchester area. And we looked at all of these charge events, about 75,000 of them, in order to understand the patterns that exist within that energy demand, both in terms of time and space. So the charge point operators, alongside some administrative organizations such as the Department for Transport, are keen to provide good and reliable access to data for the end users. Often the end users are asking quite simple questions such as, where are the electric vehicle charge points? Are they currently operational or out of order? Because that also happens.
Yeah, very true. Yeah.
Are they currently in use, or are they currently available to use? Can I book access to these charge points in the future, because I know I'm going to be arriving at a certain time and I want to ensure that I can access the charge point? What's the level of redundancy as well? What happens if I go to a charge point location, there's only one charge point there and it's out of order? How easy is it for me to access another nearby charge point, or is it a very long trip to go to the next nearest one? These are critical questions that EV drivers have in the back of their mind in the day-to-day operation of their vehicles. And the charge point network operators, alongside the administrative organizations such as the Department of Transport, need to provide this data so that people can have faith and can trust that the network is going to operate as it should, so they can go about their daily business. One of the great outcomes from the project is to showcase what you can do with quite simple data. So the charge event records that we've been analyzing through the OPTIC project aren't particularly advanced. They have, quite basic characteristics associated with each charge event, but you can take that very basic information about the operation of a network and showcase so much complexity in terms of the patterning of energy demand that's occurring. And through that, it starts the conversation going with the charge point operators, and also like the regional transport bodies and the national transport bodies like the DFT. It reveals the power that is present within this data and how it can be utilized to make more effective decisions in the future about network operation, but also network expansion too. We think that we're one of the first academic groups in order to conduct this analysis. This data is going to become more and more important as the number of EVs in our society expands, so as more households transition to EVs, because the magnitude and the scale of the data will increase dramatically. This provides researchers with a tremendous opportunity to investigate the energy demand profiles that are in place in our transportation system and our personal transportation systems. One of the outcomes I wanted from my project, and another few satellite projects that I'm working on, which are also focused on operation of EV charge point networks, is to develop like a playbook to a degree, which we can deliver to government bodies, which we can deliver to private charge point operators, to say, this is the typical patterns of demand that are present on these networks. These are the things that you can expect to occur. In order to do that, we need to figure out what those generalizations are, where we can take findings from one charge point network and then say you can be reasonably confident to observe these in a different charge point network. So we do need to do multiple case studies and do overlaps and figure out how they share similarities and where the differences are. This type of information is really important for planning extensions of networks. So if you're going to install charge points in new locations, you need to develop business cases. You need to figure out, okay, if we're going to install this, how much is it going to cost? You know, in terms of the installation and maintenance cost, and also what kind of demand profiles are we likely to be present in different locations, because those demand profiles will have revenue implications. You know, you need to know what the demand profiles are to figure out how much revenue is going to be created, just to figure out if it's financially viable. And if not, and if it, especially these borderline cases, these cases that say, for instance, okay, we're expecting to see a certain revenue, but it's going to cost us this amount of money, and they're quite close. This is where government funding and subsidies can be very important, just to provide the ability for certain locations to be pushed across the line, to go from the red into the black, so that they can become activated. And ensuring public funds go to those locations is really important. If you invest, for instance, subsidies in locations which are already very commercially viable, which have revenues that are going to easily exceed their cost bases, then there's no need for the funding to go there. There's no need for the subsidy. It's finding these ones that are marginal. That's where the subsidy needs to be located. That's why we need more of this type of analysis, figuring out these marginal locations.
Yeah, that is the reason for calling like place-based approach.
Definitely, definitely. About understanding the inherent variability that exists, even in cities. So we have locations in Manchester, for instance, which are hugely commercially viable, where you could install charge points, and it's going to cost you a lot of money, but the revenue streams are going to be a lot more, basically. But there are locations which are very marginal in terms of their cost-benefit ratios. And it's those areas that we need to find tools to identify, so that government funding can be appropriately targeted to figure out where locations need that extra bit of support to be pushed over the line. In terms of a very specific challenge that my project faced, it relates to availability of data. These charge point network operators, so the companies who oversee the operation of these networks of charge points, they're often diffused. There's quite a few of them that are operational. They are sometimes private sector companies, there are sometimes public sector companies, there's sometimes a combination of the two, so a partnership between them. And so because of that, there's no universal access point in order to get your hands on this charge event data. In the past, the operators were more willing to give you insight into their data, but I believe now they understand the value that this charge event data holds, and they're less willing to provide people like myself, independent researchers, to have hold of it. This is where the UK government can step in. The government is providing considerable amounts of funding to private sector operators in order to install and operate charge point networks. And as part of that funding stream, there should be some conditions put in place on data availability. So private sector operators should be obliged to provide access to this charging event data if it has received public funding in order to be conducted.